If you're a CityCast superfan, you have definitely heard us singing the praises of our longtime supporter, Paulson and Nace. Big news! Paulson and Nace is now Nace Law Group. Same great team, just with a new name. When you are hurt by the negligence of others, you want a lawyer that will actually fight for you, not one that will settle for the bare minimum. Nace's compassionate lawyers fight to bring cases to juries so you can get everything you deserve. If you've been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Nace Law Group for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.washingtondcinjurylawyers.com or call 202-463-1999.
If you're like me and want facials that actually deliver real results, then you have to check out Silver Mirror Facial Bar. Rated the top facial in DC since 2019, Silver Mirror specializes in expert-driven 30-minute and 50-minute facials that tackle real skin concerns like dullness, breakouts, and fine lines. First-time guests get $30 off their first facial, and they have locations in DuPont Circle, Penn Quarter, and Navy Yard. Just use the code CityCast30 at silvermirror.com/CityCast to claim your offer. That's CityCast30 for $30 off your first personalized facial at silvermirror.com/CityCast.
Today on CityCast DC. Even though she can't cast actual votes on the House floor, DC's congressional representative, Eleanor Holmes Norton, has an impressive 35-year track record of being an accomplished fighter for DC. But at 87, she's also the second oldest member of Congress. She plans to run again in November 2026, but those close to her are worried that her age is slowing her down at a time when DC needs effective leadership. Washingtonian reporter Ike Allen spent time with Eleanor Holmes Norton while investigating a complicated question. Does Eleanor Holmes Norton still have what it takes to fight for DC? Today's Monday, May 5th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Before I get to Ike in a second, I just want to take a quick moment to thank everybody who's joined our membership program over the last 2 weeks. Your support truly means so much to us and helps us keep the show going. And I'm happy to say that we did, in fact, hit our goal, which means we owe y'all some embarrassing photos and stories. We're getting those together, and we'll have them for you by the end of the week. So thank you, and you're welcome. For those of you who missed the campaign or didn't get a chance to sign up, it is not too late. You can become a CityCast neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. All right, on to the show. So, Ike, I don't have to tell you that here in DC, Eleanor Holmes Norton is essentially a household name. She has served the district for 35 years. But I think in this particular moment that we're in that feels so fraught, every day, a new attack on the district, a lot of people are frustrated because they sense that she's not doing more to really fight for the city. So I want to start there. Like, are those complaints fair?
I've heard that complaint quite a bit. And I mean, she's 87. She's turning 88 in June. She's the second oldest person in Congress. But age isn't everything. And, I wanted to talk to her in person myself. And when I did, that was the first thing I did for this article, was just try to get a sense of whether it feels to me like she is fighting as hard as she could in this moment, whether she's fully prepared, whether she really is at the helm of her staff in the way that you would expect. And I did come away with some doubts after talking to her that made me kind of look into this a little bit further. I really didn't want to go into the piece with an ageist assumption about her. And she's such an accomplished person, and her career is so amazing. She has an incredible list of accomplishments. She, grew up in DC in the 40s and 50s. She attended Dunbar High School, where she literally remembered Brown versus Board of Education that verdict being announced when she was in high school. She was at the center of the civil rights movement. Bayard Rustin was her mentor. She helped free Fannie Lou Hamer from jail in Mississippi as a Yale law student. She was an ACLU lawyer in a really kind of key moment in civil rights history. Jimmy Carter named her chair of Equal Employment Opportunity Committee in 1978. She really kind of shaped early sexual harassment law. She was an accomplished Georgetown law professor in the 1980s. And all of this was before she ran for Congress. And then she's, had this 35-year career in Congress, too, where she had a lot of victories, including getting statehood voted on, although never passed. I think all of that is to say she is extremely accomplished, and I wanted to pay her all the respect I possibly could in doing this. But we heard from a lot of sources that I would say confirmed some of the concerns we had. I mean, for one thing, we heard from a background source who's worked with her a lot for a really long time, who said that she clearly didn't recognize him at an event they were at. We've heard from, a source who has told us that she had some issues walking, and that's somewhat apparent from her public appearances, I would say. At her committee hearings, she's sometimes present for a very short time. I was at a committee hearing in February there was several hours. She was only in the room for a few minutes and delivered a quick series of remarks and then left before it was over. She also, at a public town hall that she hosted, most of the questions were answered by other people, not by her, and she kind of deferred questions to others. A number of the staffers on the call had to kind of say, "Congresswoman, are you still there?" These are things that were a little concerning to hear, and I think people are craving some reassurance from her at the moment, from someone in her position, as DC is under such strain and under attack from Republicans at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, one of those people, Beverly Perry, she said, quote, "I think she's declining in health and that it's hard for her to navigate the political waters as she has in the past." Do you get a sense that lots of folks in the district might be feeling this way or sharing these concerns?
I would say the bulk of them do have to do with that. I've heard from a number of sources, and as you can tell from me saying sources, a lot of people for this article did not want to be quoted on the record. I think it's a delicate issue. I think a lot of people in DC politicos feel pretty uncomfortable doing something that could be perceived as criticizing her publicly. The other concerns pertain to her, I'd say, lack of progress on statehood, although she's gotten votes in the House a number of times for statehood. Statehood obviously seems as far away as ever at the moment. So, when you look at her record that way, with that being the goal, you could certainly make a criticism that, for the past, she's had 35 years and that, we haven't made a ton of progress on that. And that's something we have heard from Kelly Michael Williams, who's run against her in Democratic primaries recently.
Well, one thing about her position is that because she's in DC, her position is somewhat symbolic. She doesn't actually get to vote on things. How much power does she actually have?
Yeah, so Norton can vote on amendments in committee. She can't vote on the floor. It's part of the reason we say taxation without representation for DC. It is the main reason we say that. There's only been such a thing as the delegate to Congress, an elected delegate, since 1971. So before that, we didn't even have that. We didn't have a mayor, and DC residents could not vote for president. She's kind of emblematic of the state we're currently in and have been for the last 50 years, which is that we have this representative. They're sort of a figurehead. They're meant to be able to whip kind of Democratic votes in that sense of having close relationships on the Hill that allow you to push DC-friendly policies or get things done for DC without actually being able to vote yourself. And she can introduce legislation as well. But yes, it's true that in part, her importance is as a symbolic figure, the link between the federal government and DC's own interests, her own constituents' interests. And at the moment, we've kind of seen Mayor Bowser doing some of the tasks that we might associate with that role a little bit more than the mayor has in the past. For one thing, when RFK Stadium deal came through, which of course is still controversial, but that was really spearheaded by the executive office of the mayor. In the past, you may have seen the delegate sort of be the person who would do that. So there is some change in the role, but I guess, yes, absolutely. The symbolic element of it is important. And I think that's one reason why people are kind of wondering where she is sometimes with things like federal layoffs or other things that have huge impact on DC.
Ever wondered why mosquitoes bite you? Or maybe you're curious about policy, like solving the housing shortage or bridging the digital divide. Or maybe you want to hear it all. After the Fact, a podcast by Pew, breaks down today's big issues with expert insights and real stories. Whether you're into the research or the personal stories behind it, we've got you covered. Get the stories behind the stats. Listen to After the Fact wherever you get your podcasts. Paint Care is all about keeping it simple for district residents. They make recycling leftover paint, stain, and varnish easy with convenient drop-off locations, like your local paint or hardware store. Each new paint project is an opportunity to reduce waste, and Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter. 1, buy the right amount of paint for the job. 2, use up leftover paint. And 3, recycle the rest. To get tips for how to buy the right amount of paint, explore ideas for DIY projects for how to use up leftover paint, and to look up your nearest drop-off site in the district, visit paintcare.org/3simplerules.
All right, so every Mother's Day, we treat my mom to a special day out. She gets her nails done. We take her to tea. We go out for dinner or we make her dinner. You know, that sort of thing. Now, I can do all of that because I happen to live close by her. But a lot of my friends don't live near their parents at all. And all their mom wants is a phone call. But what if you could get her something more than just the phone call? That's where Aura Frames comes in. Do you have a funny photo of you and your friends or you and your family that she would love as a keepsake in addition to that phone call? You can send her a new picture of you and the gang right from your phone. I mean, even my tech-averse mom would be a huge fan of that. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver matte frame. That's auraframes.com, promo code CityCast. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply.
Well, the question seems to be like, is she doing enough in this moment? Is she equipped to do more in this moment? And I'm wondering, for this piece, you actually spoke to her. Did you walk away from those conversations with a sense of how she is feeling about where the city is at and the threats to DC right now? Like from Trump's threats to take over Congress to what happened with the budget, like, where is she at?
She said that this is, one of the most trying moments she's ever seen, that the attacks from the Republicans on home rule and some of the trials for sort of DC's home rule are more dramatic or stark than she's ever seen. But she kind of reiterated her same lines that she's given in the past, I would say, about we really need a statehood. She said, that the harder the battle, basically, the more fight it brings out in her. So that's the way she feels about it. Many people who we've spoken to, including some really close friends of hers, someone who's worked with her since she was in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the 60s, said Norton is always, pissed off about injustice, and it really motivates her to keep going. Well, in this case, I think it's, that's one of the things that's motivating her to stay in office longer than and continue running. She's announced she's running for a 19th term, longer than certainly some people we talked to for this story would advise her to do. She pointed also to her record of working with Republicans. In 1994, when she was a very new delegate, she really helped shepherd DC through an extremely difficult time where we were in very rough financial shape, had a junk bond status, and Congress was sort of talking about taking DC over financially. Newt Gingrich had just been installed as Speaker. They had a majority in the House. Republicans did for the first time in a really long time. And she worked with Gingrich, and she helped get DC something it wouldn't have otherwise had without a strong fighter, which is a financial control board that was made up of locals. And the control board is actually something that's now credited by a lot of people as helping DC. It was something that, was tough for DC as far as sort of tough medicine for DC's financial troubles. And, there's still plenty of criticism to be made about the way Congress handled it. But at the same time, DC was on a better financial path after that. So she pointed to that moment as a moment where she had really kind of navigated a moment where there was some threat to DC's own home rule. She managed to get us through it. Now, she wasn't able to name or didn't want to name any Republicans who she now has close relationships with in the House, who she would be able to call on for sort of favors behind the scenes for something like this. I'm not sure whether she just didn't want to because she would rather keep that all behind the scenes, or whether she doesn't really have the relationship she used to. I wouldn't want to sort of speculate there, but, I'll say that some sources we spoke to did raise questions about kind of the continued relationships she has on the Hill compared to what she had, say in 1995.
It's a complicated thing. And I think that your piece really gets at the tension there of really wanting to name and highlight the contributions that somebody has made over their career. It's not anything to do with her being bad at her job, but it is a reality that, like, at a certain point, all of us begin to decline and like time comes for us all. And that like you don't want to feel like you're being ageist by bringing it up, because certainly older folks and more seasoned folks do have a lot to contribute. But we do find ourselves just nationally in this dynamic where our leadership does not reflect all the time who they are meant to be representing in terms of age. And I do think it's fair to like bring that up because it's a legitimate point.
Yeah, it's an issue that we're seeing. Average ages in Congress have continued to rise and become less reflective of their constituencies. And I should say, too, I mean, right, beyond age itself, I mean, some of the things we heard about her public appearances, her lack of recognizing people, her sort of inability to answer questions in the same way she would have in the past. This is notable partly because it is a stark contrast to her past. So it's not that, we just are saying, oh, well, she reached a certain age and it's time to go. It would be a decision that would be made, I would say, based on, sort of whether she is performing as a lawmaker and as a public figure in the same way that she was in the past, I mean, and that's why I thought it was so important to illustrate her accomplishments in her biography. I mean, yeah, we quoted, Gloria Steinem wrote that she, in a just world, Eleanor Holmes Norton would have been president. So these are, I wanted to pay due respect to her career, but I also wanted to show how accomplished she was, in part to draw something of a contrast that we saw, I think, between her past and her present.
Is there some sense that like, oh, well, maybe she's earned the right to coast. Maybe she's earned the right to decline in office, even at a time where we really do need lawmakers to be standing up for the city? Is that a sense of I'm getting here?
I literally quoted Tom Sherwood saying to me that he believes there's a sort of public collective sense from certain people he's spoken to that she's earned the right to make her own decision here, that she shouldn't be kind of pushed or hustled out of office because of her past accomplishments and what she's done for DC, and because she's earned a lot of respect from practically everyone in kind of the Democratic establishment in DC. Sort of a consensus that I think we kind of determined is that she's been in this role a long time. She's accomplished a lot of things. And when you look at her whole scope of her career, I think that makes a lot of sense. There is some version of that going around that she's look at her career. Are you going to be the one to ask her to leave? And I think, that could be contributing to, why we haven't really heard too many people bringing this up publicly before we did this piece. On the other hand, most people did say that they felt it was probably time to kind of shed some light on what she and what Norton and other politicians who stay in office until well after, a lot of Americans would retire, what's going through their mind that's keeping them interested in holding the job. Actually, I did speak to the former DC Council Chair Jack Evans, who served for a very long time, council, 30 years. He ran for mayor twice. He resigned amid sort of ethics scandals, but he tried to mount comebacks. So he's really a character who's kind of exemplifies a politician who seems to not really know when to quit sometimes.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah, he said as much to me. He said, you have to know when to hold him and know when to fold him. And he kind of said, well, that's something I don't personally know. So he sort of was honest about that. And of course, that's a different, Norton is not going through an ethics scandal. She's not facing those kinds of questions. She's facing questions about whether it might be time to kind of just let a potentially more vigorous and younger person hold her role after 35 years.
How does she feel about these critiques that she's not doing enough, that she's maybe not up to the task, that she's not like she used to be? How does she respond to that?
We asked her in person. We also asked her office to respond to some of the specifics that we heard later. They would not make her available to respond to every single anecdote that we mentioned to them. So they kind of sent me a broader statement, and that's the way they chose to respond to it. I was a bit disappointed about that, but they pointed to her overall effectiveness from this Center for Effective Lawmaking, which places her fairly high on the list of effective members of Congress in a period of kind of relatively low effectiveness, I would say, of Congress, where Congress is not passing as much legislation as they used to. And she told me that she believed, that when things got especially tough was when she really shines. And, she and her office released statements about federal layoffs, about the Home Rule Repeal Act that was introduced. Of course, she and her office will make statements about these things, but she does not appear, for example, at big protests of federal workers. She doesn't appear at the same number of committee hearings as a lot of other lawmakers. I think while she may say that, we're responding to a lot of these developments by issuing statements, I'd say there is a difference in the level of involvement that she has compared with sometime in the 90s.
One of the examples that you use in the piece is that she's maybe kind of a legislator from a bygone era. There was a hearing that you wrote about where folks were sort of dunking on each other rather than making like actual salient arguments. But that when it got to her, she was like, well, now is my time to make a salient point in a controlled manner, which she did. But that she also got there late and only stayed for 5 or 6 minutes or so. How do current day legislators respond to Holmes Norton? Does her approach work, or did it ever work?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this was a hearing I attended in February. It was the Delivering on Government Efficiency hearing subcommittee. It was chaired by Marjorie Taylor Greene. There were representatives who kind of were using this sort of bombastic language. I mean, Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, brought up, Marjorie Taylor Greene having showed sexually graphic images of Hunter Biden at an earlier hearing and said, here's a dick pic, and showed a picture of Elon Musk. So, whatever your political response to that is, I would say it is sort of a showy or bombastic type of hearing. And I mean, anything chaired by Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be a lot of attention on that. So I'd say Norton did kind of stick out in that context. For one thing, it was a many-hour hearing and she came in late. I wasn't sure she was going to arrive. She came in about 2 hours late. And when she did, she read from what was clearly, a prepared statement. I thought it was very salient. It was the names and descriptions of some federal workers and what they had accomplished and that they were now being, forced out of their jobs. I was of two minds about it in a way. I would have liked to have seen her there to ask questions of some of these Republicans who are making accusations about government inefficiency and fraud and abuse and kind of a number of claims about how the federal government works. Since, there's so many federal government workers who are her constituents, I think probably a lot of people would have liked to have seen her pushing back on some of those claims, being there to raise those questions, since kind of her voice in these subcommittee hearings is oftentimes her most powerful tool because she's not able to vote on the floor. Instead, she read a prepared statement, which I thought was quite powerful, and then immediately left. So I guess it's a mixed bag. She and her office are still effective in certain ways, and what she had prepared was salient. But at the same time, I just think it seemed out of place with this kind of combative hearing, and to see someone who, I think it would have been probably more satisfying for some of her constituents to see someone who was able to push back and be a bit more combative in these settings, since that can be, one of the strongest tools, I think, for someone who's limited in their voting power the way she is.
Well, she told you that she is going to run again after this term. She will be 91. That will be older than Biden and Trump, and only Chuck Grassley is older. Are there concerns in the district about her running again?
Yes. I mean, well, casually, a number of people who I spoke to while I was working on the story were somewhat surprised or shocked that she was going to run again. A few sources who I spoke to on background said that they felt that they knew something, that they knew better, or that they felt that she actually probably was likely not going to run, but her office reiterated that she is running. We'll see exactly what happens. She may get a more robust challenge this time in the primaries that could get a bit larger of a share of the vote, because she has continued to do quite well electorally because she's incumbent and she's respected and all the things we mentioned. But we'll see. She could change her mind, I suppose, as well. We'll find out this summer exactly what happens.
Is there anybody right now who you see being able to really take up the mantle after her that's like an obvious choice? Other than myself. No, just kidding.
Yeah, right. So we heard that some members of council could potentially throw their hats in the ring. Some have speculated that the mayor might do that. That's a total speculation. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have inside knowledge on who's thinking of running. The main thing to know that I do know is that very few people of those who I just mentioned would, I think, consider running against her. I think if she were to drop out of a race, theoretically, that would lead to a kind of a mad dash, and we'd see a lot of people running who are sort of prominent in DC politics. But I think unless she were to drop out, as it stands currently, I think she wouldn't get these kind of prominent challengers. In the past, her challengers have been outsiders, people who you may not have heard their name before they decided to run against her.
It sounds like if she runs, she could win.
I think that's right. As far as I can tell, that seems like the likeliest outcome if she runs again.
Well, I mean, this is just my opinion. I just want a better world for our elders, one where the only two options are not being thrown away or having to continue to be in a position that maybe isn't good for you at 90 and it maybe isn't good for your constituents. Like, I respect her so much that I want better for her than to feel like the only way that I could actually use my voice is continuing to be in a position that maybe isn't good for me anymore.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I think she's an incredibly hardworking person and still is. Some people would really rather work their hardest until they can't anymore. It's admirable in certain ways, but the stakes are such that I think it's fair to question whether it is the wisest thing to do.
Well, Ike, thank you so much for being here. The piece is fascinating.
Thank you. Thanks, Bridget.
Before I go, I just want to thank some of our newest CityCast DC neighbors for their support. Thank you, Lisa G., Krista S., Matthew S., Vijaya P., Adam V., Diane B., Virjal P., Larissa M., Anna K., and Taryn M. Thank you so much, and we'll thank more of y'all tomorrow. If you love what we do and want to help us stick around, become a CityCast neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. Thank you so much. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.